Get a £5 free bet every week with Offer Club from William Hill. Simply stake a total of £20 or more across the week on pre-match football accumulators with 4 or more selections, and you'll get a £5 free bet on the Friday. Join William Hill Offer Club on mobile or online now.
This is KUGAN CASSIUS Rifle Team in association with Macklinshire and Marbella in Sheffield here, ahead of next week's huge fight, the O2, 10th of September, Golovkin versus Brook. With me I've got trainer Dominic Ingle. How are you, Dominic?
I'm very good.
Yeah?
Very good, KUGAN.
How is Kel? Haven't properly spoke to him yet, but obviously the fight is nearing very quickly now.
No, he's confident. He knows he's done his training. He's put the hard graft in. You know, we've been on a training camp to Fuerteventura. We've had a good, 9 weeks notification for this fight when the fight was announced, and we'd been in camp 4 or 5 weeks before that. We'd been over in Spain, a place called Anuncia, and got a gym out there run by one of our friends who's got a nice roasting pot on the top of a hill. It's like an oven, and we're training there for a few weeks, and then we went out to Fuerteventura, did some weeks there. Been back in Sheffield under the guidance of Sheffield Hallam University, and we've had Kel monitored, from day one of his camp, and it's all going to plan.
Obviously, listening to Eddie Hearn and Kel talk, it didn't seem like it took a lot of time for Kel to make the decision that he wanted to take this fight, but was that the same sort of time process for you? Did you have to digest it and think about it a little bit more?
I think I said before that ultimately, Kel's 30 years old now, and we've had a lot of conversations over the years about fights and the fights he'd like to have, and he's been doing it a long time. From 9 years old, he's been in boxing 21 years, and the daily grind of living a boxer's life, it's a big sacrifice. He spent almost 20 years getting to where he needs to be, and at some point, you go through the amateurs, you're fighting 3-rounders and 4-rounders. It's easy enough. You can still have a life outside of boxing when you're doing that. But when you become a full-time pro, everything that you do is either going to aid you in what you want to do to be a champion or come against you. And you've got to live quite a strict life. And there's ups and downs that we've seen with Kel. But one thing we talked about is when he became world champion, we thought the bigger fights, were going to come a lot easier and a lot faster and a lot freer. But that's not been the case. And after 2 years of being champion, this is probably going to be Kel's most defining fight, and it's a different weight division. He'd love to fight the guys at welterweight, the Danny Garcias and Marquez and all these fighters. But if he has to wait another 2 years to get those fights, his career's going to be finished. Now, this marquee fight that he's got with Golovkin, generally you've had to have 3 or 4 big fights to be able to do this. You look at the fights that Tommy Hearns had before he boxed Marvin Hagler, had some tremendous fights. Welterweight, Sugar Ray Leonard, same with Duran. Before they got the big fights and into the massive paydays, they had to do their apprenticeship. And Kel's more or less sidestepped that purely because there's been nobody there to challenge him. Nobody wants to fight him. For me, he's been avoided. So he had to take this fight because he wants a career-defining fight, and maybe he's never going to get one again.
How much of a gamble would you call this? Or is it a gamble in your eyes?
Every fight's a gamble, regardless of who the opponent is, because whether it's a guy you consider good or a guy you consider that you can beat. If you overlook somebody, a lesser opponent, you can beat, and that's been happened loads of times. And sometimes, even when you fight a guy, with the reputation of Golovkin, if you get carried away with his reputation, then you beat before you get in the fight. But luckily, Kel's had a lot of experience over the years. He's been in a gym where there's been fights like Nazim Mami, Johnny Nelson, Junior Witter. Seen the big fights. He's been in and around those situations, so he's well used to everything what comes with it. And I've always instilled into him. He's always seen that at the end of the day, the person in front of you is only human, regardless of what they've got. They might be able to punch. They might have this reputation. But Mike Tyson was the same. There's fighters through history who've had this fearsome reputation but have been beat. And you look at the fighters who've had a long career, longevity in this sport, and remained unbeaten all the way through their career. Floyd Mayweather, Joe Calzaghe, not the biggest punchers in the game, but smart fighters. And generally, in my opinion, from what I can remember looking back, it's those type of fighters. They haven't been the biggest punchers, but they always seem to find a way to win. And sometimes, the advantage of relying on, being a big puncher, being aggressive, when you're throwing everything at an opponent and you haven't finished them off, what are you going to do? Revert back to boxing? And Golovkin's a full-on guy. He fights the same way every time he comes out. Yeah, sometimes he's a bit cautious. He'll come out and work his way in with jabs and see what the other guy's got. But basically, he's a pressure fighter who likes to come forward. And Kell Brook is a smart fighter. He's not, one of these guys who's crash bang wallop. He can box when he has to. If you look at Sean Porter, when he boxed Sean Porter, realistically, he actually fought a different fight in that fight to what he did to, probably his previous 10, because he had to find a way, what was going to be effective against Sean Porter. So, and then when he boxed Jojo Dan and Kevin Beja and these type of guys, he employed a different strategy. And with Golovkin, it's going to be the same again. If he meets fire with fire, or he decides to box smart, we're not saying until we get into the ring on the night, we'll see. But, if Golovkin's thinking for 1 minute that he's going to be physically stronger, bigger, overpower Kell Brook, bigger puncher, and that's all he's going to rely on, then he's going to have problems. Because obviously we know what his advantages are. I don't think he knows what Kell Brook's got. I don't think he realises that Kell's a big guy, that he can punch. And on the night I think he's going to be in for a surprise.
In reference in terms of weight, where do you draw the comparisons between Khan's fight with Canelo to this, what we're going to see next week?
If you think in all his career, Kell's boxed round about the welterweight division. I think 10 stone, 10.5 stone. Khan started off as a super feather, did they? Super featherweight, I think. Did they? Featherweight, whatever he started off. Lightweight, started off a lightweight in pros. I think lightweight he started off. So if you think the jump he's made from 9-9 up to 11, whatever he fought Canelo, it's quite a big jump. And when I looked at him when he put the weight on for Canelo, it was like he'd done it haphazardly, really. He just decided to eat what he wanted. He didn't look in fantastic condition. Whereas with Kell, he's had to be conditioned to carry the weight. His body's got to be able to carry the extra muscle mass. His heart's got to be able to deliver the oxygen to it. So we've adopted a very systematic approach how Kell has gained the weight or made middleweight. It's not just a case of eat as much as you can and train as hard as you can. There's got to be a balance between, the energy that your muscles require and what your heart can output oxygen-wise. So it's been calculated. We've got to bring Kell into that ring, a stone heavier from what he normally does. And his cardiovascular system, which has been used to fighting at the welterweight division, has got to be able to supply that. And I think we've achieved that, through science, through crunching numbers, through having a dedicated training program, and accounting for the extra weight gain.
Judging by people's comments and opinions relating to this fight, it seems that Kell's already been written off. Is that the way you're looking at it?
To be honest, coming to fights, years ago when I first started out in boxing, I used to read everything, boxing news, online reports, and all that does is confuses you. If you know what you're doing, you just get on with the job in front of you. Same with Kell. If you start reading, reports and what people's opinions are, I think you can end up, doing your own head in. I don't read it. We know what we've got to do. We know we've got to beat. We've seen the guy. Strip it down to what it is. It's two men fighting in a ring. All right, there's going to be like a good couple of thousand people watching it in the arena, and it's going to go worldwide. But when it comes down to it, it's one guy trying to physically impose himself on another, and who's got the mentality and the physical toughness to do it. And that's what the job is. So, if they've written him off, they've written him off. So what? It's not going to influence what I'm going to do. It's going to change how I'm going to train Kell Brook. It's not going to influence Kell Brook how he fights, because we've got a way we're going to do it. We've done the training. We know what's in front of us, and we've adjusted to the guy we've got to fight. So it's either going to pay off and work out, or it's not.
We saw Errol Spence recently claim that mandatory spot now with his quite a emphatic knockout of Leonard Bundu. It's all up in the air in regards to what whether that fight will even take place regarding on what happens next week. Because if he wins, obviously the options are greater, but he does have the option to come back down to 147.
I think if, first of all, he knocked out a 40-year-old bloke at the end of the day who beat Frankie Gavin on points after having him on the floor. So when you actually put that fight into perspective, it weren't such a great win, was it? You know what I mean? It's like beating up your dad. So, they can rave about Errol Spence all they want. Knocking over stiffs and like fighters who were past their best, it don't really impress me. At the end of the day, there's fighters out there who give Errol Spence a good run for his money, but he's not fighting them. And it'll be a different kettle of fish if he ends up fighting Kell Brook. Kell loves fighting southpaws. We've got hundreds of southpaws in our gym, and they're 10 a penny. So where it might be awkward, bundle switch hitter, can cause you problems. But like I say, he's a 40-year-old bloke at the end of the day. He's been in a lot of tough fights. He had a tough fight with Keith Thurman. Maybe just got to the point after boxing Thurman where he'd had the stuffing knocked out of him, and Errol Spence was picking up the scraps. But if Kell wins this fight, or when he wins this fight at middleweight, I can't really see him wanting to go back down to welterweight, because it's always been talked about him, getting to, when he gets about 30 odd, moving up a division maybe to light middleweight, because it is going to be difficult getting down to 10.5 stone. He can get down to the weight, but what happens as you get older, it gets more difficult to refuel, rehydrate and perform after you've made the weight. So, it would have been a logical step anyway. So we'll see what his performance is like. If he wins the fight, he'll probably keep at middleweight. If he gets beat in the fight, in a close fight, maybe he'll go to light middleweight and do that. Or if he's motivated enough, because it's not going to be the fight that he's got to fight Errol Spence what's going to deter him from actually getting down to welterweight. It's whether he can go through the process. After having this training camp at middleweight, going through the process again of getting down to that weight, because that's the hardest thing, not the fights, not the training. The weight making processes, you ask any fighter, it's the most difficult thing to do. When people around you are drinking, eating, everywhere you look it's food, all you're thinking as soon as you've eaten is, when's my next meal coming? And if you've never found yourself in that situation, you have to try it once in a while, because it's an horrible place to be. And then you've got, on top of that, you've got to do all the physical work, you've got to do the sparring. You might get into a sparring session absolutely drained, and there's a kid in front of you who's going to try and bash your brains out for 8 rounds, and you've got no energy, but you've got to do it. So, it's whether he can be motivated enough, regardless of what the outcome of this fight is, to get back down to that, that weight and do it.
Just finally, Kid Galahad has been added to the bill for Saturday, so a bit of a late addition, but good opportunity for Kid Galahad to get himself out again.
It's a fantastic bill, and he's always been in the gym. He's always trained alongside Kell. He's always pushed Kell. He's always tried to motivate Kell. Even the time he had out of the time out of the gym, he's always said to Kell, look, I've got to carry on boxing no matter what. You're at your peak. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. You have a moment in boxing where it lasts 4 or 5 years to be the best you can be, and it's a great opportunity for Kell, obviously, but it's a great opportunity for Kid Galahad to be on that bill, on such a big bill, even though it's the undercard. The atmosphere, what's going to be there, to be part of that, and to be part of the build-up process, and to be in a training camp with Kell Brook, it's all experience. It builds you up for the time when you're going to be in that position, and the more you can absorb from it and learn from it, the easier it's going to be when you're there yourself. So yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity for Barry.
All right, well, Dominic, thank you very much for talking to iField TV, and like I said, fight week
can't come soon enough.
Starts next Tuesday with a public workout, and then showtime 10th of September.
We'll all see what Kell Brook's got.
We will. Dominic, thanks for talking to us, and we'll catch up with you fight week.
No problem.